My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hello, my name's Chynna Clayton. I'm the founder of Matriarch Made Development, and my favorite quote is, "Service is the price you pay for the space you occupy."
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
With so much on your plate, wouldn't it be nice if ordering food for the office were easy and reliable? My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. With Easy Cater's network of over 100,000 restaurants nationwide, you'll have a huge variety of options near you for any group size, dietary need, or budget. Your food arrives on time as ordered, all supported 24/7 by Easy Cater's team of experts. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more. Hey friends, welcome to the Leader Assistant Podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and this is episode 222. You can check out the show notes and all the links and more details for this conversation at leaderassistant.com/222. That's leaderassistant.com/222. All right, I'm very excited to be speaking with Chynna Clayton today. Chynna is the founder and CEO of Matriarch Made Development, which is a consulting firm that helps organizations develop high-performing administrative teams. And Chynna has a fun resume, and we're excited to dive into that. She worked in the personal office of Barack and Michelle Obama as their director of travel and event operations, and also even had administrative roles at Disney, which is probably an interesting place to work for sure, fun place to work. So Chynna, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for having me.
So you got to tell me, I know you worked for former First Lady Michelle Obama and worked in the White House, but you got to be honest for just a second and tell me, was it more fun to work at Disney or the White House?
It was definitely more exciting to work at the White House than Disney. But, Disney's an amazing company. And, they truly are about creating the family friendly atmosphere. And that's even within their offices. There was very much this team oriented spirit. But, just having the variation in your day to day, the White House was where it was at.
Nice. Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, let's learn a little bit about you personally first before we dig into your career. Where do you live and what's your favorite thing to do in your city?
Oh, goodness. So I live in Washington, D.C. However, I'm originally from Miami, Florida. So I'm a Florida girl through and through, although these days I'm definitely making the distinction between being from Miami, not necessarily the state of Florida. But my favorite thing to do is trying new restaurants with my wife here. Like, DC has an amazing food scene that I think a lot of people take for granted. And, there's just always something great popping up.
Nice. What's your favorite type or genre of food these days?
Oh, my goodness. I'm a big seafood person.
Nice.
And
nice.
I also love Italian, a good, authentic Italian restaurant too. Yeah.
Great. Actually, I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but I was in DC in December and went to a pretty fun restaurant there. And the guy I was with was telling me all about the scene there, and it seems pretty lively. So
it is.
Awesome. Well, what's your favorite movie or documentary?
Yeah. So, I really do love documentaries. I like facts and I like raw information and, obviously learning through stories and firsthand accounts. So, the idea of like chronicling experiences and events, it really intrigues me because I feel, the best way to prevent things from reoccurring is to know the history of things, right? Especially the wrongs, or at least I hope, right? If we're paying enough attention to our history, we should not be repeating a lot of our mistakes from the past. But my favorite is Slow Burn. It was on Netflix, and it was about the Watergate scandal. And essentially, the series is an adaptation from the first season of the podcast, and it goes beneath the surface with all these, with all this in-depth research and footage to uncover things that I personally never knew. And as I'm watching, I'm like, I wonder if the people who were living through this knew any of these facts or details. And I watched during COVID, and, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, how will everything that we're experiencing right now be explained, right? So how will the documentaries produced 50 years from now recount Trump and the pandemic and all these things that we were, going through in the moment, will that generation judge our choices, right? Because as I'm watching, I'm low-key judging some of the choices that were made back then. But clearly, I had all the facts and access to all the facts right in front of me. So it was a little easier to cast that kind of judgment. But, I'm just curious. I'm like, how will people perceive what we are going through now and the decisions that we made and about dealing with it,
Yeah, very, very fascinating. And speaking of Netflix and political documentaries or even shows, I have to ask, have you watched the show House of Cards? Okay, so I got to tell you a funny story. So I interviewed someone who works in the Premier League in English football, soccer. And I had her on the podcast, and I asked her if Ted Lasso was was it at all like working in the Premier League? And she's like, "What's Ted Lasso?"
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, okay, so I'm going to have to delete this out of the interview because she hasn't even seen the show. Well, fast forward 2 years, she's like, "Hey, I just watched the show and I know what you're talking about now. And yes, it's just like working in the Premier League."
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, I had to ask you, is House of Cards at all like working in politics in DC and the White House?
No, it definitely takes it to an extreme level. I there are certain things, as we're watching, it's just like, they'd never do that, or Secret Service would never act that way, or, all the things, and all the protocols. But yeah, it was quite entertaining, if I might say.
Yes. Well, when I was in DC, I was walking around the monuments and everything. And I just kept playing the House of Cards theme song in my head, as I'm walking around DC. So anyway.
Oh my gosh. I thought you were going to ask if it was anything like Scandal.
Oh, I actually haven't watched that show. So.
Oh, really? Okay. Fair.
All right. So one more personal question. If you could have one gigantic billboard anywhere, maybe Times Square or wherever, with anything on it, what would that billboard say?
Wow. I think I'd say something simple, leading with kindness will get you so much further. And I know that sounds cliche, right? But it is truly my mantra, being kind and empathetic, even when it's challenging to do so, right? Even when someone has wronged you beyond belief. It's just how I live my life, right? I know that there is favor in being kind to people, because I feel like I'm an example of it. It obviously involves having a forgiving spirit and trying not to take things too personally. And that can be tough, but I challenge more people to try and do it and start practicing it, because there's no reason not to, right?
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's great. We'll get the billboard set up now. All right. Well, probably the most common question you get asked, and I'm sure my listeners are curious, so I've got to ask it. How did you end up working with Michelle Obama?
Yes. So it all started with an internship, right? So I attended the University of Florida, where I received a dual degree in event management and political science, and a minor in business. And back then, it was my hope to start my own event planning company in Atlanta after school. And then maybe later down the road, run for office somewhere, or locally in Miami. And as a graduation requirement for the event management degree, I had to complete this internship in my field. So I applied to a few internship programs in Atlanta. And then my college advisor mentioned this White House internship program. She's just like, we had a student who applied under the Bush administration. I think, you should definitely look into it. And so I did. I applied and I was accepted not only to the White House internship program, but with the program with the Atlanta Hawks planning events for them. And I almost passed up the White House internship opportunity just because it didn't fit into my plan, which was to end up in Atlanta after graduation, right? But, thank God for my mom and talking some sense into me. And she was just kind of like, why would you ever pass this up? First African-American administration, you have family in Maryland that you can stay with, so you won't be alone. And obviously that's, you can live rent free, single mom thinking, cost effectively as well. And so I was just like, okay, fine. Right. So I accept this internship. And I was an intern in the Office of Presidential Scheduling and Advance. And I knew what scheduling was, but I had no idea what advance was. I just knew that on the website, it had some mention of events. And so, turns out advance was the event planning and logistics arm of the White House. So when the president, the first lady, vice president, or then the second lady would travel beyond the White House gates, there was a team of people who would go out and coordinate all of the logistics involved in that. And so I went on the road doing advance for about 3 years and got to see much of the world as a result. Like prior to that, I'd never done any extensive travel. I'd never done any real international travel aside from like Jamaica for a spring break. And after being on the road for 3 years, I then worked on the reelection campaign, the presidential inaugural committee. And it was over that course of time that Mrs. Obama says she took notice of me. And I handle a lot of their hotel logistics in those roles, or RON logistics, which stands for Remain Overnight. So anytime that they, stayed somewhere outside of the White House, there was somebody who was coordinating with the hotel, Secret Service, military agencies to get all the ducks in a row. So being in those spaces, she's really taken notice. And, after the inauguration, that's when I did my 2-year stint at the Walt Disney Company, supporting 2 of their senior vice presidents, but I was still kind of going on the road in my off time and taking on trips. And shortly thereafter, I got a call to become the First Lady's body person and essentially her right hand.
Wow.
Yeah. All from an internship.
I love it.
Yeah.
And, all from your mom's nudge, right? Like,
yes, absolutely. Could you imagine? I'm like, oh man, life would have been completely different.
Wow. So you said you got a call, like, was that just from someone in the office that said, hey, we want you to come in?
It was the chief of staff in the office.
Okay. Nice.
Nice. Well, actually deputy chief of staff in the office. Yeah.
Great. So you then supported the family or specifically her, you said?
Yeah. Okay. So specifically Mrs. Obama, but with that came, obviously supporting the girls as well. But yeah.
Cool. So what was the funniest thing to happen during your time working with them, with the Obama family?
So the funniest thing is, this is what I'll say. I almost didn't accept the job. Yeah, crazy, right? Initially, I was just unsure if I wanted to accept the position because, again, Disney was this amazing company. And, I just got accepted to a master's program for hospitality that Disney was going to contribute towards. And, even with the White House on my resume, it had taken a while to really settle into a career that I was excited about. And I've always been about stability, right? So I knew that this position at the White House would come with an expiration date at some point. Yeah. And I'd be, searching for a job again. So I was kind of hesitant about leaving what I knew to be my norm, and rocking the boat and taking that risk. But again, mom comes in and she's just like, are you kidding me? Opportunity of a lifetime, right? Like, this is history in the making. Like, why would you not want to be a part of that? And she's just like, I don't want you to allow this fear of, finding a job afterwards to get in the way of you actualizing dreams, right? Like, she's just like, take a risk, do something unfamiliar. At the end of the day, there'll be something for you to fall back on. Like, don't think that way.
Yeah.
So, I got to thank God for my mom, because, not everybody has that kind of support, somebody that's supporting you to dream, and somebody's that's behind you, and providing a safety net, should things not work out. But yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's great. So you don't have to get into details, but how often did you end up having to jump in and act as, or even maybe even not even have to jump in, but having to be aware of and have knowledge of what was going on with President Obama and coordinating with his assistant and team? And in other words, were there moments when you had to kind of pick up the slack and help the team out? Or was it like, I have to at least know enough that if I did need to pick up the slack, I could? Does that make sense?
Yep, that definitely makes sense. So thankfully, it was very much this team atmosphere. And so, yes, you did need to know enough that, God forbid something were to happen, you could step in and assist where needed. Quite frankly, it was important for me to just have some knowledge of where he was, what he was doing at a certain time, just in case Mrs. Obama ever asked, just in case, the kids were checking in about parents' whereabouts, but for the most part, we would always kind of work in tandem, right? So when they were traveling together, it was just like, a no-brainer that if she was just signing something, I'll hold a Sharpie out, keep it, pass it over to his assistant so that he could sign next. And big on hand sanitizer and making sure, that we're utilizing that, and having that at the ready. There are certain things that his assistant wouldn't always travel with, right? Tissues and floss and all this stuff that I had in this big Flotus bag that I carry around. And so, just being able to assist and help him out in the event that he needed that, or there were times that he'd be able to grab her purse from the limo before I could get there, and just really working in tandem and treating it like a team atmosphere. But, clearly being aware of how he supported the president, so that in the moments where he needed to step out, or in the moments where, again, God forbid something happened, you could fill the gap. But those moments are far and few between. Honestly, we didn't have much slack.
Right,
but,
right.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, I've never worked in the White House, so this is on a much smaller scale. But I have worked with high profile executives throughout my career, and oftentimes people around me would or will get close to me in order to get close to my executive, or in order to kind of get some of the inside scoop on what's going on with my executive. And another way to put it is people would essentially look right through me as if I wasn't even a person at times. And I'm just curious, obviously working for a higher profile person in your role, did you ever interact with people who treated you as less than human because they just wanted to get access to Mrs. Obama? And if so, how did you navigate that and personally guard your self-worth in those moments?
Yeah, well, and I am sorry that you had to experience a lot of that. It sucks.
Thank you.
And, honestly, I did not experience that. And I think partly because Mrs. Obama did a really good job at stating my importance from the beginning, right? So when she was introducing me to people, or when we were, coming into contact with folks, she was very much like, this is who you need to go through to get to me. And, she is my right hand, and just really showing how valuable I was. And I think in turn, that caused people to understand, my worth and treat me with respect. And, I'd obviously do the same. Right.
Mhm.
So like, no matter who you were, if you were the elevator operator or the custodian at one of the schools you were visiting, or even a celebrity, I acknowledged and I treated you with the same level of kindness and responsiveness. And I think that's kind of what set me apart. You have some people who do let proximity to power go to their heads. Right. But
Mhm.
for me, before and after Mrs. Obama, I'm still Chynna Clayton, right? The daughter of Doris King. So it's just like, don't get me wrong, right? I'm proud to work for the Obamas all day long, but it wasn't something that I'd flaunt. I just kind of let my work speak for itself, because I didn't join their team for my own gain. I felt that I was serving something greater. And she really did do a good job at just enforcing the level of respect that needed to be had with her team.
That's great. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
I talk about this quote from Dorothy Sayers in my book, where she talks about how the community as a whole is better off if we focus on serving the work. In other words, doing good work versus angling for applause. I love that phrase,
Oh, yes.
angling for applause. And so it sounds like you had a good, solid grounding of, hey, you know what? I'm here to do good work and serve the
Absolutely.
work. And I'm not here for applause, because when you are for applause, and to be honest, in my prior roles, I definitely angled for applause more than I should. And that's when you are, probably more vulnerable to these.
Yeah,
people.
I was going to say that's when your feelings can get hurt. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So great. Well, thanks for sharing.
Of course.
Okay. So obviously there's busy, and then there's high pressure White House busy. What's your top, one or two tips for navigating high pressure situations?
Yeah, I think top would be maintaining composure and thinking quick on your feet. When you're in an environment where the pressure is high, the best thing you can do is keep a level head and not freak out. That energy is contagious. So I feel that like if you remain composed and confident, it brings a calm and a reassurance to the situation, right? Like you gotta fight the feeling to react to external pressure, right? I think that allows you to really think through solutions where necessary and the outcomes. I think back to, we had an event in the White House kitchen garden one year. And during the Obama administration, the White House started making their own honey on site. So there was a beehive near their kitchen garden. And, this particular day, someone forgot to close the beehive the night before. And we found out just a few hours before the event and found ourselves, okay, high pressure situation. And I was the person who had to deliver the news to the first lady. And I thought to myself, I'm like, if I remain composed, she will too. Right. And so I delivered the news knowing that there were just certain things that were beyond our control, and that, I could help shape this and deflect tension by trying to remain positive. Right. And letting her know everything that we were doing to ensure the safety of all involved. Unfortunate situation, but here's how we are on top of it. We had medical staff at the ready to respond. And having that few hours before the event helped us to, identify any kids or any participants with bee allergies, right? But can you imagine if I would have freaked out, right? The team in charge of the event would have freaked. The person who was responsible for the hive, would have been even more terrified. But I think, my ability to remain calm really helped us focus in on the solutions.
Yeah. And, kind of what you said about responding instead of reacting is great. Great way to look at it. So what about self-care? So how have you managed stress and resisted burnout throughout your career?
Yeah. I've found that there's like no secret sauce to this, right? It's a struggle, and it is something that you really have to be intentional about. And that's easier said than done, especially in our line of work. As an assistant, you are at the mercy of someone else's schedule, right? And you are constantly putting someone else's needs before your own. But you have to remember, you're no good to yourself or anyone else if you're running on E, right? So you need to take the time to reset and recharge. There's this this book by Erica Keswin, and she asked, what do you do in your life that makes you feel most like you? And once you know that answer, that's what you should always make time for on your schedule, right? That is what goes first. And so I think, if you schedule yourself by saying, from this time to this time, I'm going to focus my attention on work, but after 7:30 or come this weekend, I'm not doing anything work related, right? I'm going to take some me time. I'm going to enjoy my family. I'm going to go out to dinner. I'm just going to sit down and have that glass of wine and watch a movie, whatever it is, but just try to be consistent about it. For me, during the White House, that was much harder. I really did not find that balance. But post White House, when the stakes weren't as high, I was able to carve out time in the mornings or on the weekends and being sure to communicate that to my boss, right? So that she knows, hey, this weekend I'm going to go on a walk, so I may not be responsive from this time to this time. Or, in the mornings, check my incoming. And if there was anything that didn't need an immediate response, I'd go make my cup of tea, sit down, have a little moment for prayer, and just take my time, because technically the clock starts at 9, right? Not 6 a.m. But I think that's the thing, right? Especially with my generation, for sure, we have problems prioritizing, because I think there's this guilt that comes with delayed responses, right? We think that most people want everything immediately. And I'm sure that there are people who do, but there are also folks who are just like, as long as you get back to me, I'm not expecting a response within 2 minutes of hitting send. So I think, we were kind of horrible at setting these boundaries. But what I'm finding is Gen Z is like in their boundary setting era, right? It's as if they took heed to our lack in that area. And they're just like, it won't be us. But, there's also a balance to these boundaries as well, right? Because you don't ever want to set so many that you jeopardize the functioning of the team as a whole, right? Because right now you're only looking out for self and setting so many boundaries up just, to preserve self. And that's really no way to be, right? You do want to account for the team in your boundary setting. But, again, I would just say, don't let a day go by where you haven't somehow carved out a little time for yourself. It may not be much, but you do need time to just clear your mind and, have thoughts and dreams that aren't centered around work.
Wow, well said. Well said. Well, Chynna, if a brand new assistant came up to you tomorrow or gave you a call or shot you an email and asked, hey, I'm starting my first week ever as an assistant. Do you have any tips for me? How would you respond?
Ooh, I think I'd say, remember that this is all new, right? And it is going to take time to adjust to the new work environment, to, your colleagues, to your boss or the executive or principal who you're supporting. You have to give yourself grace and accept the fact that you will make mistakes, right? But you have to learn from them, right? And then vow to yourself to never make those mistakes again. You're human. You're not perfect. So we are going to make mistakes. But the key is just not repeating the same mistakes over and over and over.
Yeah, it's great. So tell us about Matriarch Made Development. Why did you start it, and what's your mission?
Yeah. So I started it because I just felt that our roles are so much more elastic than the word assistant even encompasses. And it was shocking to me that assistants are considered entry-level positions, right? And there's no real training for it. There's no schooling dedicated to our line of work. And you get in and it's sink or swim. And a lot of people, they credit it to, it was a mismatch. I hear a lot of executives just saying, it's just not the right fit. And sometimes we just aren't communicating our expectations, right? We just aren't taking the time to communicate what we need. And a lot of people don't know what they need from their assistants. So, my whole thing is trying to work to design a program to correct that, right? I want assistants to stop seeing themselves as just assistants because we are so much more. And when we do our jobs well, the people that we support can perform at their best, right? Like we take part in that success. So my hope is just to change the narrative, not only on how we as assistants and admin staff view ourselves, but also how the outside world views us. I eventually want to create a platform where we can build community and create a network for assistants, a place where we can share lessons, find resources, and, build upon our skill set.
That's great. So how can, do you work with executives and their assistants together? Do you work with them separately? Are you kind of anything and everything? Yeah. How do you practically work with them?
Yep. So I work with executives and their assistants together, and then assistants, more of a one-on-one or group session sort of training. What I tell executives is just like, I'm in the business of changing your life for the better, right? And knowing, you can walk around knowing that everything's under control and have this trust in your assistant and the schedules that they're putting together and the information that they're gathering for you. You won't have to worry about the ball being dropped or stress about travel and the changes that are occurring while you're on travel. Making sure your preferences are accounted for, gaining back some time in your day. And all that can happen by you investing in your assistant through training. And then for the assistants, it's more of like sharing of best practices and tools, things that work well for me. Being a listening ear and helping navigate through some of the complications that come with the job.
That's great. So what would you say, from your experience as an assistant and working with other executives and assistants and trying to help that partnership, how would you answer the question, what makes an assistant a leader?
Wow. Yeah. I think the key to being a leader in that role is knowing how your operation runs, right? Knowing who the players are and how to keep the ball moving. Being a valuable asset, right? Not only to the person that you support, but to the team, to the overall team. I feel like assistants really do know the inner workings of things, right? We know how to get things done. We know the best ways to present information to our principals, the questions to take into account before you go into a meeting with the boss, and just using that knowledge to support the team, right? Offering your guidance. I often say that the next executives are sitting just outside the boss's door.
That's great. I like that. Cool. Well, where can people reach out and learn more about Matriarch Made Development and connect with you?
Yeah, so that would be at ChynnaClayton.com. So that's ChynnaClayton.com.
Great. And I will put your link in the show notes for sure, so people can reach out and say hi and find out more. The show notes are at leaderassistant.com/222, leaderassistant.com/222. Chynna, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your stories and wisdom and passion for the assistant community as a whole. And best of luck to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And please keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com